So folk, I was recommended to check out this boy called Gary Economics. Apparently he's went through that of the likes of the London School of Economics, and here's a boy, Gary Economics. Let's have a listen to what he says. Again, this is really all to do with all the anti-capitalism, but here you go.
Well, I've been thinking for a while we need to do one about capitalism, because we get asked it a lot, right? Capitalism is the problem. It's a bit frustrating for me because it's like, it's so non-specific.
No, I don't know what he's meaning by being specific, because throughout recorded history it's been abundantly clear through government's interference which created the problems. You could take, for argument's sake, the fixing of the ratio. Again, that's something that's anti-market. Imposing a paper currency upon the market, something that, again, that the market never asked for. And these people are always contradictory. It's like I've pointed out numerous times before. They're very good at one hand turning around and saying to you, oh, the unregulated markets caused the banking crisis. When they say the unregulated markets, subconsciously they don't realise that they're acknowledging what capitalism's really about, leaving the market be to regulate itself, but then contradicting themselves and ignoring the fact that they've been fixing the interest rates, fixing the ratio, imposing a currency upon the market that the market never asked for. You know, all of these things are things that they completely ignore. You could use, for argument's sake, again, American political economic history ended up fixing the ratio of money, it ended up wiping gold out of the market, made silver the dominant standard. That was a problem that would never have occurred had it been left down to the market. Now, I've pointed out numerous times before, folk, that when you're speaking about capitalism, you're speaking about leaving things down to the market value. So that could be the market value of your interest rate, the market value relative to your prices. It means leaving it be to the laws of supply and demand. And what you would typically see is that of price fluctuation and stuff like that. And it just happened to be that when it came to the 19th century, when these, central banks would control and manipulate and fix the interest rates, that's what created the boom and bust cycle of the 20th century. But for whatever reason, he seems to think it's a novelty that government's interference has created all these problems. Maybe his kind would love to show to me one example of where a free and open market resulted in the creation of oligopolies or even monopolies, or even where cartels were able to form and maintain.
Problem with capitalism is different people have very, very different ideas of what the word means, right?
That's because most people don't even understand what capitalism is, and that's the bottom line of it. They end up redefining everything to suit their own agenda. You can't turn around and say, well, capitalism's got something to do with collectivism. Has it really? Well, that's funny, because in every single source that you could possibly find, you'll find collectivism is a word synonymous to the word socialism, even by definition. The definition of collectivism is more or less the same as socialism, and it was long argued by socialists themselves that, individualism, this is basically them conceding and acknowledging the fact that capitalism is individualist. Again, they're very good at this. They chop and change just to suit their arguments. They've long argued and basically says that, capitalism with its individualism is all greedy and self-centred. And what defines individualism, folk? That's what defines individualism. And the freedom of government's regulation. It's in the dictionary definition. It couldn't even be clearer than that. This is where these people love to try and play the game, and then they try to say to you that, free markets is just a myth. Rubbish, because the term free itself is scalable. And what do you mean by scalable? Well, certain economies are freer than other economies, and even in free markets you have had some level of government involvement in things. For example, Singapore and Hong Kong, where they've had government ownership of housing. That doesn't prevent them being free market economies. Their view of how the world works is kind of like, if there's 0.01% of government involvement, then it's not a free market, therefore free markets have never existed. I mean, do you honestly understand, folk, how stupid, how irrational, just how illogical that reasoning is? When you look through recorded history, folk, what evidence is proven to us is that the world's most successful economies have all been those economies which have been the freest economies in the world. What have people like this actually got? What have they actually got to show there for you for socialism being economically efficient and lifting anybody out of poverty? They've not got anything. They've not even got a single thing.
So I'm going to say, provide the basic working definition, which some people will disagree with, but it's what I'm going to use for this purpose of this discussion, which is capitalism is a system which has a relatively small government, relatively low taxation. People are expected to take care of themselves with their own money. Yeah, and then there's freedom to trade, freedom to own things. People call it a laissez-faire system. There's not a lot of government control. People can do whatever they want. Everybody's free to do what they want.
So this is actually a key thing here. He's actually conceding there, basically saying that it is laissez-faire. Now, if you don't understand what laissez-faire means, it's basically French for individualism. He's acknowledging the fact that capitalism is individualism. Of course, anybody that tries to redefine capitalism to pull it outside of individualism and somehow correlate it to collectivism, they're just being irrational, playing games of mental gymnastics. They're trying to, tie capitalism down to something inherently socialist. This is the definition of a collectivist, and it's in plain English. It's saying in front of you, socialist. Right? This is essentially what a collectivist is. You can't turn around and say, I'm just going to tie capitalism down to collectivism, and then say, look, this is all the fault of capitalism, and that's essentially what they're doing. This is essentially the game they're playing. Where's the evidence of that? 2008 financial crisis. They subordinated individuals' rights and liberty. Because this is a concession. He's more or less just telling you there that capitalism is about economic freedom, doing what you like, doing this, doing that, doing this. If it's done, because he's just conceded there, he said that capitalism is about people having basically the freedom to do what they do with their own money. Well, that's nice then. So what do you call forcing society into a collective group in the name of government taxation, subordinating their individual rights and liberty, and then forcing that society collectively as a group after subordinating their individual rights and liberty through the use of socialism in this mixed economy? What the hell do you call forcing that collective group to subsidise the losses of special interest groups? I'll tell you what we call it: socialism.
It's important to realise once you use that definition, none of us live in fully capitalist countries, right? The UK has an NHS, that's not a capitalist institution. The UK has public funded education, that's not capitalist, So none of us live in a perfect capitalist system. But
thank you. At least you acknowledge that fact. We're living in a mixed economy, and as a consequence of that, we're living in corporatism. At least that's a concession there that he's acknowledging. However, with all this stuff like the NHS, the state-run education, he's talking as if it's something you wear with a badge of honour, and it's just not the case at all. The state-run education system, going back in history, it basically was founded upon the use as a tool to politically indoctrinate the masses. It was a useful tool for that, for the sake of governments, and they certainly succeeded. So I can't say that it's been a failure in that respect. It's been a success to them in that regard, because they have successfully politically indoctrinated the masses. That's the reason why these people despise the thought of the education system being pulled outside the horns of government, because they know that they require it in order to indoctrinate people to make them fall for socialism. The NHS has never worked a single year in its entire history. As I've pointed out so many times before, look through all the articles of the 1950s. It's been faced with all the long waiting lines, chronic hospital bed shortages, hospital staff shortages, surplus waste problems, thousands left neglected die every single year, and that's what they call successful. Now, that was the case in the 1950s alone. All these umpteen articles that pointed out all these problems, right? And all they did was they brushed it under the carpet and continued on with it. They laughably came out with an article and think like 1968 or something, saying that, they finally solved the problem with the shortages. Before you know it, in 1971, they're complaining. There's like a newspaper article complaining about the chronic shortages of hospital bed. It's the same story, chronic shortages of staff and stuff, all the way through the 1970s. Along comes Margaret Thatcher, and they're going to use that to say, this is the reason why it's not working. Fucking load of nonsense. It's their attempt to just continue on kicking the can down the road, or brushing it under the carpet to pretend that the failure, was something else. The game of projectionism, basically the game that, people who suffer from narcissistic personality disorder, people who suffer from narcissism are the sort of people who play the game of projectionism, gaslighting and stuff like that. And if it's no that, it's just like Christian Yemyet's book, Socialism, the Failed Idea that Never Dies. He touched upon about the whataboutery phase. Well, this is exactly what they play with the NHS. right? So if it's not a case of the failure and the excuses, it's then a case of whataboutery. So you point out all the failure of the NHS, and what do? They do, oh, what about the main American healthcare market? Look at their healthcare costs. As if to try and pass the main American healthcare market off as if it's something capitalist when it really isn't. You know, I wouldn't wear any of that with a badge of honour, because let's face it, see if it was an open free market economy and you had a free market in fire service, in police, in education, healthcare, all those things would far outperform anything the government's ever ran. They want to pretend to you that there's no difference between a government that's all regulated the private sector to a private sector left be to regulate itself. In fact, they've even tried the sly move to try and say that your market today is somehow unregulated, which is basically just a load of pish.
Let's talk about capitalism, which is the idea of freedom to own, freedom to trade, and it also means freedom to generate inequality, right?
Oh, what a horrible thing. Oh, the inequality. If anybody argues to you about economic equality, that's unfair and it's unjust. There's nothing fair about economic equality. Why is that unfair? I'll tell you why it's unfair. Because how the hell can you pay somebody the same wage who works harder, who's better skilled, and hold them back in order to pull someone else up? And that's not what happens, and this is the difference between his good intentions to the economic reality. Because if you view everything down to a question of scale, we would somehow be more economically equal today than what we would be of a free market, but it's actually proven opposite of the case. Through his good intentions, all his socialist government interventionism has done, as well of course the welfare statism and social security and stuff like that, all that has done is driven people into poverty, it's driven their cost of living through the roof, it crippled the job market, making it more difficult for them to find work, all in the name of paying for all these things through that of running the printing press that's driven inflation. Basically, they've made life more difficult for people, all in the name of their good intentions of creating so-called equality. So that is to say, although he intends to create that equality, it creates the opposite of what he intended. Just because you intend to do something doesn't mean that's how it turns out in practice. See, so long as the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting richer, that is really all that matters.
There's something which is good about capitalism, which is that capitalism rewards people for doing things that other people want. So if you're making a load of paintings and nobody wants them, you ain't gonna make no money. But if you're making a load of paintings that people want, then you are gonna make money. Now, why do footballers make money in the capitalist system? Because tons of people are willing to pay to watch them. So in a sense, capitalism is good because it incentivizes all these people to play football and people want to watch football.
But there's a point here that he doesn't understand. And many of them don't understand this because they don't understand that wages really all come down to, again, today with the laws of supply and demand. And I don't know if he's going to go on about this. The reason why Lionel Messi was getting paid unbelievable amount of wages compared to that of doctors and nurses who work in the NHS is pure and simply because you can't argue with the laws of supply and demand. There is only one Lionel Messi. They don't understand why the wages of nurses and doctors is nothing compared to that. It's not about the principle of, but doctors and nurses save people's lives. But that's not going to change the fact that there are many, many thousands of doctors who can do the same job, and that particular nurse or doctor can so easily be replaced with many others. He doesn't understand that why the football players like Messi would get paid astronomical amount compared to that of, doctors and nurses.
There's like a philosophical idea behind it. Because everybody is free, then you will get rewarded if you do things other people want, which means in theory, people should start doing things that other people want, which is good because we're all helping each other. Right? This is the idea behind it, right?
That isn't ideological. That's just part and parcel of reality. Perhaps it's like Adam Smith's example with the butcher. Just by his mere presence, it's created wealth for a great many people surrounding him. And both parties benefit from that exchange.
The problem is, if you actually look at the outcomes of capitalism, lots of people have things which they really, really want or even need that they don't get.
Here we go. Right, first of all, folk, there's no such thing as perfection. You're not going to get everything in life. People imagining, oh well, everybody should be driving about in a Ferrari. It's not how the real world works. If they produced millions and millions and millions of Ferraris, then sure, that would be plausible. There is far greater opportunity within that of a free market economy and a capitalist system. You can't say that in today's economy. Today's mixed economy, because of socialism, it's created a problem where people, struggle because of the inflation. They've driven the costs up of everything. They've driven inflation up. They've rendered wages practically worthless. And then they basically pin the blame off onto capitalism, as always.
So we have a capitalist system, and a lot of people can't afford to feed their kids, right? So, they want to feed their kids, and there's enough food for them to feed their kids. Why are they not feeding their kids? We have people who are working jobs who are homeless, Of course they want homes, but they're not getting homes. And what this reveals is there's one key flaw to capitalism, which is that capitalism doesn't reward you for doing what people want.
Business has to, produce what people are in demand of. It's a two-way street. He's all over the shop. Earlier on he says capitalism is about economic freedom, all this, free to do with your own money, free to do the business and stuff like that, free this, that and the next thing. Right, okay, he acknowledges that, and then he changes the story and he starts going on about today with the problems where people are struggling, there's homelessness, the cost of living's through the roof and all sorts, they can't afford to get their own house. How the hell can you jump from one end to another, which is basically a contradiction, when you're speaking about today's economy, which is basically that of a corporatist system where socialism has been responsible for all of that? What do you expect? You're sitting there with a welfare state that crippled them. You've got social security that basically bankrupted them and sent their cost of living through the roof. And yet he wants to, sit and blame that off into capitalism. You're going to speak about capitalism, you speak about that today with a free market. We're not living in a free market today. So how the hell can you turn around and say about the cost of living and stuff like that? Well, of course you've got a serious problem there.
Capitalism rewards you for doing what people with money want.
Rewarding is down to basically people getting for that in return. They're basically getting the material possessions. They hand their money over, the business gains in exchange, and whilst you hand your money over, which they benefit for, you get the product in return. See if it wasn't the consumer driving what production was, these businesses wouldn't know what to produce.
There are people in poor countries in the world that are blind and they just need relatively inexpensive surgery to fix their blindness. But they don't get that because they've got no money, right?
I don't know where he's gone with these poor countries that are no capitalist. If you're going to critique capitalism, then critique capitalism. And again, the main American healthcare market isn't capitalist.
So capitalism doesn't give those people, you're a dentist, right? You will see there are dentists that spend all of their days doing expensive cosmetic surgeries for wealthy people. And at the same time, there's people who are in agony of toothache and can't get a dentist, right? And this is because capitalism doesn't reward you for doing what people want.
Why on earth would they go on about, capitalism being about the freedom of people to do with their own money and the freedom of exchange and stuff like that? And that doesn't even describe today's economy. And then he starts going on about today's economy. He's all over the place. He doesn't even know what he's going on about. What he doesn't understand is the fact that the reason why dentists are so expensive today is simply because of socialism that's restricted the market. See if that was a free market economy. Do you know what that means, folk? Let me just explain this in plain English for you. If you've got a free and open market, it means you're in the absence of all that government red tape, all the government regulation, right? What that simply means is when you remove all that government regulation, there is no longer a barrier to how many people are going to flood the market. Plus, of course, there is another barrier, a costs issue, not just a case with the regulation, there's the tax issue. So, people have got to be able to afford it in order to, start up and run business. See, when you remove all that, remove all the government's taxation, all that government regulation, etc., and dramatically reduce it, right? What that means, there is no barrier to entry into the market. That means there's no limit. There's no limitation. At the current moment, there is limitation. They restrict the market. That's part of the problem. When you remove all that restriction, what does it mean? It means that there's no longer a limitation to how many people can flood the market. Now, what socialists try to argue is, and it's just a load of piffle because they don't even understand it, they try to argue that deflation was a bad thing. It never was a bad thing. And in order for them to justify that deflation was such a bad thing, they tried to justify inflation and all the rest of this nonsense. They tried to justify, driving costs up on the consumer because somehow it would protect these specific business people because they would get more in wages and stuff like that. So that it was anti-consumerist. Hundreds and hundreds of competition floods into that area. Why is that? Why do you think that there's an incentive to do so? Let's imagine in this hypothetical scenario, you're talking about healthcare or the dentist as an example, and they run their own private practice and they're one of the few that exists in the country at that current time. Because of that dentist or doctor is able to charge an absolute bomb because he's the only one available. It's the laws of supply and demand. There's going to be a very, very high demand for him, and therefore he's going to charge an absolute bomb. But then one day, because of a free market, because moving towards a free market, well, since there's no barrier to entry into the market, what do you think it incentivises? Well, people look at that and think to themselves, right, he's making an absolute killing out of that type of career. I want to do that myself. I want to, go through, get all my qualifications. I want to come out the other end and I want to do that career for myself. There's no barrier there. I want to jump in competition and earn that sort of money. But here's where the economic reality comes into it, folk. And this is the economic reality that his kind have not got any concept of because he doesn't understand economics. The more and more competitors who jump in as providers, because it's going to attract hunters to come flooding into the market. The more and more who jump into that area of the market, the greater the number of output there's going to be, the greater number of providers there's going to be. Therefore, the only way that initial doctor can continue, or the initial dentist can continue to charge higher or and above his competition, is if he or she is providing a better service than most of them. If he or she isn't, they can try and keep their wages, try and keep their prices high as they like. But if competitors are providing just as good, if not better, for cheaper, he's going to lose business, and he will quickly lose customers, and it will naturally come down by the market's forces. That's how things work in the real world of how a free market operates, right? You're not living in a free market today, and that's why that isn't happening, right? You've got a limitation. You've got a restriction on the market. It's costly to become dentist and stuff like that. It's costly to enter that career. It's costly and restrictive and all the red tape and stuff like that. Once you remove all that red tape and hunters go flooding into that area of the market, the prices come flooding down. It's as simple as that. It's the laws of supply and demand. So what was to blame for that very problem that you're speaking about today with the dentistry today? Because people like him believed, we need to keep the private sector in check, which basically means or regulating the private sector and taxing the backside out of them. That's another story and another example of how their good intentions always result in dire consequences, and they never learn.
Capitalism rewards you for doing what people with money want. If you can do something that rich people want, you can make a ton of money, right? But if you can do, if you want to provide dental work for like poor people in Africa or in Southeast Asia, you ain't going to make no money for that because they don't have any money, right? So once you understand this, then what you see is inequality is an absolute cancer at the philosophical root of capitalism. Because if you have a broader equal society, then it works, right? Because everybody has money, so you should do the thing which lots of people want. But once you have inequality, then it doesn't matter if 99% of people hate something. You know, if you do a job which sucks wealth out of the poorest 99% and gives it to the 1%, you can get paid a ton of money for that. I know because I did it, right? Capitalism works for the people with money.
The point on money, and again, this is the problem where these people don't understand, right? Money is a medium of exchange. Money is not wealth. He thinks it's just as simple as, well, if people have got more money, then they're wealthier. Wrong. Completely wrong. If that was the case and we used that same principle in logic, then surely the Venezuelan people, despite how much money's been printed out of thin air, then surely with all that paper currency that they held, they'd be stinking filthy rich. So why then were they dumping the paper currency? Why then, with all that paper currency, could they scarcely buy one toilet roll with it? The answer is simple, folk. Inflation. He doesn't understand about inflation. He doesn't understand where inflation comes from. He doesn't understand the purpose of money. He doesn't know what wealth is. Wealth is not to do with how much money you're earning. In fact, you are wealthier if you're able to hold less money in your pocket, but being able to buy more with it, because he doesn't understand the concept of the purchasing power. Money is a medium of exchange. It's no exception to the laws of supply and demand, and that it's no down to how much money you've got. It's down to how much you can buy with the money that you've got. There's a difference there. If you can buy a lot more with just £10, you're wealthier for it. And that's the point his kind don't understand. Because he doesn't comprehend that the reason why people are struggling today is because socialism's driven inflation soaring out of control.
If people want to have a discussion about what is the ideal system, you know, is capitalism the best system? Could we have other systems? We can have that discussion. The system that we have is falling off of a cliff. And I would prefer to prevent that disaster from happening first. Because if we don't do anything about what's happening now, it's going to be real, real bad. Let's fix the problem that we have, and then we can talk about, is there a better way to do it? I just don't want things to be really, really
We're living in a system where the private sector's all regulated by the state, and he doesn't even realise that. He thinks that your private sector is somehow lacking in government regulation. He also thinks that the solution to the problem is mere government regulation. In other words, apparently keeping it in check. It was that keeping the private sector in check that led you into this crisis. That's why you've got a lack of opportunity. It's why your private sector costs are soaring out of control. And see, when the problem gets worse because of his solutions, what do they end up crying out for as a solution? Nationalisation. They're like a walking circus show. This is the reason why you're never going to get out of this mess. Because you've got far, far too many people like that who just don't have a clue. It doesn't matter how much you try to explain to them. You're never in a million years going to get through to them. Anyway, folk, I've went on long enough with regards to, this particular video. I will do more. But that is alarming. These people are just, they live away in another world, away in their own. Very, very big problem. Very big problem. Anyway, folk, if you've got anything you would like to add in yourself, comment in the comment section below. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like the video and share the video on that. And of course, I shall talk to you later. Cheers.